Hi guys, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatoria. So first up, there may be some minor spoilers. In fact, if you're looking at the picture behind me, don't look at it now if you're not up to date with Game of Thrones. So if you don't want to be slightly spoiled, I won't give any major spoilers in this, then you should probably turn off now. However, if you either don't care, or you already know from the books, or you've seen this already, or indeed if you don't mind one minor spoiler, then watch on. So what we're talking about here, so what we've got is Stannis Baratheon's army there, and we've got the Bolton's army there. Now, I don't know whether you guys, if you've seen this you'll know already, but if you haven't seen this, what we've got here is a body of troops on foot, i.e. infantry, and a massive army on horse, i.e. cavalry. So, incidentally, the word cavalry, I'm sure most of you know, comes from cheval, the French for horse. And the infantry in this case are in sort of lines. They're a little bit straggled because they weren't expecting to be attacked then. And the cavalry are in nice great blocks with a sort of outriding units coming out here. Now, we don't actually really know who, well, someone out there obviously knows, but I don't know who they consulted for the sort of tactical kind of know-how and information to put this scene together, but it looks very good on screen. I'm not going to criticise it really. We don't know huge amounts about how different cavalry were deployed in different periods and how they were arranged, should we say. But what is noteworthy to start off with is that generally speaking infantry can obviously stand much closer than cavalry can. Having said that, there are 19th century accounts of cavalry riding knee to knee. In other words, putting the horses, in fact putting literally the riders' knees next to each other so that they're as close as they possibly can be. This was something particularly done in a heavy cavalry charge. Now, something that comes up under several of my videos is the heavy cavalry versus light cavalry division. By the 19th century, there's actually a fairly, for the most part, a fairly minor difference between heavy cavalry and light cavalry. It mostly dictates what type of horses they ride and what kind of swords they use and what kind of uniforms they wear. But actually in the field, heavy cavalry and light cavalry very often, certainly by the mid-19th century, were being used in very similar ways. However, originally going back, if we go back to the 18th and originally to the 17th century really, when these cavalry divisions were formulated in Europe, and you could say it goes all the way back in fact to the Middle Ages in Mongolian and Turkish and Persian armies. You've essentially got heavy shock troops who have the heaviest horses, the heaviest armour, usually lances or at least long swords, and their objective is to plough into an opposing force at an opportune moment to break them, to shatter them, as a kind of death blow, and you hold that heavy cavalry back until the right moment, because if you expend it too early, cavalry is quite difficult to get to come back again and get coordinated to use it again. Obviously the best trained cavalry can do that, they can wheel around and so on, but that's a light cavalry thing. I'll come onto that in a moment. And we see at the Battle of Waterloo, for example, the famous charge of the Scots Greys. In fact, the Scots Greys were very effective, and they charged through the French, and they carried on charging, and basically that was it. They did one useful thing in the Battle of Waterloo, and then they were just like spread out across the field, and it took so long to sort of get them back again. They weren't very useful after a certain point. But generally speaking, heavy cavalry are there for that bam, for that death blow, for that game-changing moment where you can send the cavalry in. Light cavalry, entirely different. Light cavalry's main duties are harassing the enemy and scouting. Okay, so they generally speaking go ahead of the army as your main army is marching along, and your heavy cavalry's back and keeping their horses rested, sometimes even walking on foot rather than riding them. The light cavalry is off scouting around, giving you information about where the enemy are, strategic points on the landscape, where the enemy artillery is, that kind of stuff. And once battle is started, the light cavalry are essentially there to look for opportunities, to stay mobile, stay moving around the field, sometimes to screen the movements of your infantry or indeed heavy cavalry, So sometimes, literally, just to basically ride backwards and forwards in front of your army to disguise what you're doing with your army. And there were even cases during sieges where cavalry was put in front to disguise movements of troops in preparation for an assault during a siege, and the cavalry took lots of damage. For example, in the Indian Mutiny, the Siege of Delhi in 1857, this happened, and the cavalry were ordered to literally sit there on their horses and just be shot at to disguise screen the movements of other troops. But once the battles commence, mostly the light cavalry are looking for opportunities. If they see there's a group of troops who look like they're wavering, maybe hit them in the flank and then ride off again. Don't engage in a melee. Don't just go like in many computer games, cavalry goes, and I've got to say Rome Total War is quite bad for this, but cavalry tends to go in and then get stuck on the enemy infantry. In that situation, the infantry will win. Surprise, surprise, infantry are better at fighting on their feet than cavalrymen are. Okay, so you don't do that, but you don't just go bam in with light cavalry, because they can't duke it out with the infantry. And remember also the placing of the troops, because the cavalry are more spread out. Every cavalryman will be facing several infantrymen. Okay, so it's just a bad idea. So light cavalry would be moving, sweeping in and out, and harassing the enemy on the side, and of course looking for any units who start to break and run away, because cavalry are superb at attacking people who are running away. And this is something that often gets overlooked, because people think about battle, but they don't necessarily think about what's happening after the battle. Okay, so once those troops start to break, bam, that's when you send the cavalry in. And for example, in the 100 Years' War between England and France, in the 14th and 15th centuries, the English traditionally fought on foot most of the time. It was part of their battle tactics. It was how they had lots of archers, lots of men-at-arms, all pick a good strategic point, usually on top of a hill, usually protected to the sides by woods or rivers or other things, and then wait for the French to attack. And that was the basic English tactic. But they did use cavalry to pursue fleeing enemy, or indeed to take strategic points so they'd send the cavalry in, dismount, take that point, hold that point until the other army could get up there. So it's this quick moving kind of ethos, and also the flexibility of, if you see the enemies pursuing, quickly get on your horses and charge after them. But now I finally get to the point that we're talking to here. So we don't know whether these are light or heavy cavalry. I would say, generally speaking, in the Game of Thrones universe, and knowing what the Bolton's army is like, I would describe these as heavy cavalry. So they are doing a heavy cavalry action. Most of them are armoured, a lot of them have spears and lances, and they are charging straight at the opposing infantry. Now, ignoring for a second the question of comparative sizes, in this case Stannis Baratheon's army is smaller than Roose Bolton's army. Okay? But is it a good idea to charge directly into infantry? Well, lots of internet experts, and that's right, I probably qualify as one of those as well, but lots of internet experts over the years that I've been on the internet, so for the last 15 years or whatever, a lot of people will say, oh, well, a horse won't charge into men standing there with spears. Really? Won't they? Well, history disagrees with you. The fact is, there are lots of examples from history of cavalry doing exactly that. And I think the reason for the misconception is that modern horses aren't medieval war horses. Surprise, surprise. They're not even 19th century war horses. Modern horses are, for the most part, riding horses. Yeah, a lot of people who joust and do feats of arms and these kind of more bellicose activities use polo horses or hunting horses. They're not usually the biggest horses, but they're usually quite robust. They can turn quickly. They're a little bit more stable on their feet laterally, and I'm not a horse expert, but they're better for that kind of activity. And the fact of the matter is, in the medieval period or the Game of Thrones imaginary period, or indeed in the 18th or 19th century, horses for war were trained quite differently, and for a certain part were a different kind of horse than we're used to today. And the fact of the matter is, there are countless examples from across history, whether we go back to the Roman period, or whether we look at the 19th century, of horses charging into infantry. They did do it, and one of the most famous examples, and I'm not going to recount the whole thing, I've described it before, but it is actually in this book, and that's why I'm holding this book. So it's in Swordsmen of the British Empire, which I wrote an introduction for. It's by D.A. Kinsley, and it's available on Lulu Books. Just get rid of that book now. It is fully described in there, but in 1860, Britain went to war in Persia against the Persian Empire, or Persian Kingdom, I think it was then. And there was an occasion where a British light cavalry, in this case, although they were acting as heavy cavalry essentially, charged straight into a Persian block of men with bayonets and muskets. And they literally broke the square. They had formed square, which is what you do in that period against cavalry. Square is better resisting cavalry from any side, because it means you've got no flank. They've all got their bayonets out, and the guy at the front won the Victoria Cross, and the guy behind him who rescued him also won the Victoria Cross, and literally he rode his horse through the bayonet points. Of course the horse died. I think probably the second and third and the fourth horse died. But, you know, horses are a commodity at that date. And they went in probably as a wedge, they don't describe, but probably as a wedge, and they literally split their way with horse flesh into the square. Having split the square, the guys at the front came off their horses, or at least the front couple did, and certainly the guy that won the Victoria Cross, who actually went in head first, came off his horse was dead, leapt up, sabre in hand, and then started cutting all around. And of course this created absolute mayhem inside the square, at the same time as all these other horses are hitting the front of the square. And they broke the square, the square collapsed, and then of course the cavalry can do its real job and mop up and chase after all the people who are running away. So the fact of the matter is they may not be normal, and they may not be the sort of typical thing of what you're looking to do with cavalry, but the fact is there are lots of examples from history of cavalry breaking infantry, breaking them both when they're in lines, in other words in ranks, or in square in this case. Now square was supposed to be the real anti-cavalry sort of setup, so even there they managed to break it. So when I first watched this, coming back to Game of Thrones, when I first watched this I thought, well, he's got all of this cavalry and there's this small infantry force, and you could say that they're in something like a square, or they haven't probably properly prepared themselves. Is this the right thing to do? Well, my initial thought was, really, if I got all this cavalry, I mean, what you see happens is he charges in front here, and then the cavalry naturally laps around the sides, which is what you expect. Okay. In fact, I'll just show you that. There we go. Oh, there we go, Sansa. Okay, let's just rewind it back to... So you do start to see that the force starts to lap around, and this is more what I would have done, okay? Rather than charging everything from the front, okay, what I would have done is I would have split it probably into about 3 parts. And I would have, and I'll tell you why in a minute. I would have charged 1 part up the front, and I would have done 2 up the sides. This incidentally is probably somewhat similar to what Marshal Boucicaut was planning at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, but that's for another video. So essentially the front force, what it's there is to pin and occupy. Okay, so what they see coming is this force at the front, so they concentrate at the front, and then of course you've got your 2 wings that come round, or horns of the buffalo in Zulu terms, come around the side and attack in the flanks. Hooray! Broken army. And the thing that people often get wrong in TV and films is they think about slaughtering as many of the enemy as possible. It's not always about that. The quickest way to win a battle is to make them run away. Okay? If you can make them run away at the beginning, for example with a storm of arrows, and they all get, so many of them get wounded that they just go, screw this, and run, brilliant. You've sacrificed none of your men, you haven't got stuck into a protracted battle or sort of engagement, and they've run away, and then you can send in your light cavalry and you can harass them and kill them as they're running away and split up, and you're far less likely to lose men in that situation. The reason why I said into 3 parts and not 4, so we go bam, bam, bam at the same time, is give them a place to run away to. We see right the way through history, one of the common errors Well, I would call it an error in most situations when it's done, is to completely surround an enemy. If you completely surround an enemy, they're not going to surrender because they know they're going to get killed in that situation, and they can't run away. So they're going to fight to the very last man. Now, a wounded and cornered animal will really be a dangerous thing, and they will take down a lot of your men and horses and essentially cost you resources by doing that. So you don't ever block them into a corner. Always leave the enemy with a place to escape, unless, and this is the caveat, unless there's some specific cultural reason or blood feud reason why you want to kill them to the last man. Okay, and obviously if it's a very small force, then maybe there's not much risk involved in doing that. So if it's 10 men versus 100, then probably surrounding them and poking them to death is not a big risk. But in this case, we're not, I don't think, at least as far as we can see on the screen, we're not dealing with hugely different odds. We're probably dealing with kind of 50%, 100%, so they probably outnumber them 2 to 1. In that situation, even if you've got twice as many men, you can still lose a lot of men and horses killing this 50%. So I would attack them front and sides and let the rest attack away. But I would just go back and reiterate, a lot of people, even me initially, would go, oh well, I wouldn't charge my cavalry straight into the front because what's going to happen? But as I mentioned, and this is I suppose the main point of the video, you can charge cavalry straight into infantry, and it can work. Cheers guys!
Click subscribe now and also follow us on Facebook.